Let's bring in our global ABC Affairs Editor John Lyons, who's in the studio with me. John, I mean, we had to clarify that we heard what we thought we heard moments ago when he made those comments, such a casual delivery of what is such a profound shift. What did we hear?
Well, Gemma, that was a political earthquake, 9.5 at least on the Richter scale for the Middle East. An American president has just overturned 50, 60 years of bipartisan policy, of accepted policy in the US, policy accepted by the European Union, by Australia for a two-state solution. The hope that what the United Nations decided in 1947-48 with the creation of Israel would lead to peace in the Middle East. It was extraordinary. I couldn't believe when he said, we will take over the Gaza Strip and we will own it. You know, he's basically saying that the United States will unilaterally seize one of the most sensitive parts of the Middle East and just take it over. And when he was asked by somebody who will live there, he said the world's people will live there. It'll be the Riviera of the Middle East, an international, unbelievable place. Now, he's been building up to this, but what we just heard then, I think, will be studied in generations by historians, because if this goes ahead, I think it locks the United States and Israel into long-term conflict with the Arab world.
We've got, we'll repeat some of those comments that we heard from Donald Trump just now.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site, and get rid of the destroyed buildings.
So, John, there's always that question, are they off-the-cuff remarks or is this policy? But it was repeated over and over again. And not making that mistake again that we've heard comments from Donald Trump and thought they were off-the-cuff remarks when indeed they were not.
That's right. He's clearly been thinking about this for some time. He's been letting out hints over the last few days. He says everybody he speaks to loves this idea. And it's interesting, we need to think how the Arab and Muslim world will think about this. In Israel, the right wing, the far right, will love this. In fact, Benjamin Netanyahu said something very revealing there. He said that Donald Trump has taken this idea of moving Palestinians to a higher level, even than the right wing in Israel. And while he was speaking, while Donald Trump had made those comments, interesting to see a tweet on X by Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's one of the two leaders of the extreme right in Israel, saying, Donald, this looks like the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Just to put that into perspective, who Donald Trump's appealing to here. Last year I was in Israel for Four Corners and we interviewed Ami Ayalon, the former head of Shin Bet, Israel Security Services. He described that man, Ben-Gvir, who is applauding so gleefully now Donald Trump. He said he's a terrorist. And Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister, talked about these messianic extremists of Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. This has even surprised the far right in Israel. I don't think they can believe, A, their luck, and B, that the American president would go this far. And to me, he was talking like, it was like a chief executive of a company announcing a takeover. That we are taking over BHP, or we're taking over this company. We are taking over Gaza. I mean, it's one thing, I suppose, when he said we will take over Greenland or we'll change the name from the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. People guffawed a bit and Donald Trump Jr. went to Greenland and everyone had a bit of a laugh. And that sort of receded a bit. But to say I'm going to take over Gaza and Americans go in there and essentially level it, clear it, and develop it into this Riviera. I mean, that's just theft of land. And for those two men in the Arab world and across the Middle East, they'll be looking at those two men. Let's have a quick look at the timeline here. 1947, the UN says, let's create the two states. There has to be a Jewish state alongside an Arab state. 1967, the war between Israel and its neighbours, the occupation of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank begins. Then the Israelis pull out of Gaza. And then we have October 7, atrocities by Hamas, in my view, war crimes. Then for 15 months, thousands and thousands of American bombs dropped by the Israeli army have led to this devastation and rubble. Now we have the two men standing side by side, Netanyahu clearly delighted, while Donald Trump says essentially, let's turn it into one of the world's largest and newest real estate developments. This is politics like we have never, ever seen before.
And that reasoning, I mean, that devastation, that rubble there in Gaza, that goes to his very reasoning where it takes it upon himself, this is Trump, to speak on behalf of Gazans, saying that they would love the opportunity to move. Now, we heard a bit of what he had to say about Gaza as it stands at the moment. Let's have a look at that.
The Gaza Strip has been a hellhole for people living there. It's been horrible. The Hamas has made it so bad, so dangerous, so unfair to people. And by doing what I'm recommending that we do, it's a very strong recommendation, but it is a strong recommendation. By doing that, we think we're going to bring perhaps great peace to long beyond this area.
So we had these profound comments that we heard at this press conference about the US taking over, but we had a hint earlier ahead of that meeting where saying that Gazans should effectively move elsewhere. There'll be, 4 or 5 different places for them to go.
Well, in fact, he's gone from 4 and 5 different places an hour and a half ago. Yep. To 8, 9 or 12 now. Yeah. So there's 7 more places over an hour and a half. Suggests to me this is pretty chaotic. It's on the run. Now, what will be worth watching now will be the pushback from the Arab world, particularly the Saudi Arabians. The Jordanians and the Egyptians are in the debt and thrall of the United States. The United States essentially props up those two dictatorships. Well,
Trump said, he does have a feeling that they'll be favourable to this.
Yeah, he has a feeling because he can essentially bring down those regimes as they currently exist. They have to make a choice. I think Egypt will, Al-Sisi, the general who took over, will probably do what Donald Trump, largely what he wants. They're much more compliant. The Jordanians will be more of a problem. But the really key player here will be Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the emerging giant of the Middle East. Now that Iran's become seriously weakened with the full backing of Donald Trump and the Sunni world, Saudi Arabia is the glittering prize for Israel, for normalisation. That's the one they really want. They had the Abraham Accords under Donald Trump's first term, and now the prize was that. And in fact, one of the reasons I think Hamas made their October 7 attack when they did, and this is a view supported by former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, is I think Hamas wanted to head off that normalisation deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. That's the glittering prize, because once that's done, then if the Saudis don't insist on a Palestinian state, that's the end of a Palestinian state. Now, if the Saudis say we decide for whatever reasons on the Arab street we can't go along with this, this is essentially a forced transfer that's being suggested here. This connotes sort of imagery of Palestinians being put in trucks and taken away to another place. Now, that's not an image that anybody in the Middle East, I imagine a lot of Israelis wouldn't be comfortable with that image, because these people are not going to go willingly. The Palestinians are surely the most determined and stubborn people in the Middle East. They've had so much thrown at them, and Hamas has thrown everything back at Israel. So what we're seeing here now, it's seismic. We're seeing a complete political earthquake in the Middle East.
So many questions to follow from that. Immediately though, John, what does this mean for the next round of ceasefire negotiations?
The ceasefire negotiations ushered by Donald Trump will probably go ahead. It's in Israel's interest that go ahead. They want to get those remaining hostages out. Tragically, many of them are not alive anymore, so they want the remains so they can be given a dignified burial in Israel. And I think that will go ahead. I think that this is such big picture stuff that it goes way above that hostage deal. This now gets into the realm of what does... Iran was a major player now, and they're quite right that they have been weakened now. Watch what Saudi Arabia is suddenly opening itself to the world, massive tourism, they're becoming a big player, and Donald Trump's always had a particular connection. His son-in-law makes a lot of money out of Saudi Arabia, Jared Kushner, and so I think Donald Trump will look at Saudi and try to convince them.
We know that Netanyahu's been under domestic pressure to keep this war in Gaza going, and we know that Donald Trump has said that he wants to be a peacemaker. So trying to get your head around how those two, Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, are in lockstep. We heard the comment from Netanyahu there in that news conference, Israel will end the war by winning the war. So what do we take from that?
Well, from the sort of chemistry of the two there, it sounds like Donald Trump will back Benjamin Netanyahu in whatever the aim is. But the question is, we always wondered what happens now with Gaza. We've now got a proposal from the United States President that's essentially to turn it into the world's most unlikely major property development. And there have been people in Israel, by the way, on the right who've joked in the last few months about a condominium on the waterfront, and we can take that land in Gaza. And a lot of the settlers in Israel want to return to Gaza. They were there and they were physically pulled out. Many of them didn't want to leave. And so they'll be delighted to want to go back in there. But the idea, I mean, to hear a US president saying, we will take it over, we will own it.
Yeah.
So can the United States just decide we want to own this, we want to own that? I mean, can they just say we want to own anywhere in the world? Is that what the world's come to?
Yeah, and there were a few questions on that, and Trump continued to double down on it. We saw in recent weeks those jubilant scenes of people returning to northern Gaza, for example. As this news filters through there, I mean, how is this going to be? What is the reaction we're going to see from Gazans, from the wider Arab world?
Well, the Gazans are desperately trying to get food and water over the last... We know that in recent weeks, a lot of babies have frozen to death, according to human rights groups. It is the most miserable place on earth, or one of. Children have been having adult operations over the last year without anaesthetics. The numbers of children with legs and arms amputated. UNICEF calculated a year ago that there are as many as 19,000 orphans there. We've had children burying other children, burying their siblings because the parents were dead. So I think the people in Gaza, I mean, if they need to get food and water and medicines before they can even contemplate this big picture, to know that there's a man standing in the White House essentially saying that there's a number of 12 or so different places you can go to. Now, he did say there could be numerous sites or one site. But, I mean, history will judge today as an extremely key moment in the Middle East.
And John, can you just sum up for us how profound a shift this is that we have seen here this morning?
Well, Gemma, this is a US president putting forward the most radical idea I've ever heard from any White House on any subject. This is so radical that it's difficult to even comprehend. And the Israeli Prime Minister, even he said, and he's on the far right himself with his government, said this has taken it to a new level. So I think it will take some time to fully comprehend what this all means.